How can this be happening? What can even be done? Why should I even care? These are the questions we ask ourselves as we learn about the inhumane suffering people experience on the other side of the globe. The difference is, even if we forget about it at the end of today, their suffering will still continue. Hi, I'm Calvin Milas, and for my Introduction to Human Rights final project, I've been studying the religious culture of the Yazidis and the women of that culture and how basically they're being persecuted against and stripped of their human rights. In this video are a few of my family members that I sat down with to kind of ask a few questions and talk about human rights with. Cody, who's in high school. Maddie, a current college student. And my mom, Chrisanne, an experienced adult. I chose each of them hoping to get some unique viewpoints based on their life experience. Before explaining my actual research topic to them, I decided to ask them a few other questions like, what are the human rights? Do men and women in the US have the same human rights? And how do these questions compare outside of the country?
Alright, so what do you think are human rights?
I think human rights are being able to follow whatever dream that you have, having the availability to get the schooling necessary to follow that dream, to be able to not only believe in God, but to be able to worship and talk about Him and pray in public.
I think that human rights are basic human privileges that every person is entitled to experience in their life.
Just having the right to choose things and do what I want.
Do you think that females have the same human rights as men?
I don't think that they do, but I think that they should.
Do I think they do? Yes.
I think that here in America we do for the most part. I think that over the years, the rights of females have gotten stronger. More females are in the workforce doing upper management jobs that they hadn't been able to before. So in that way, I think so.
None of my family members were actually that wrong. On paper, according to a lot of official documents, women have almost all the same identical human rights as men do. In fact, since 1999, the United Nations has actually passed 8 resolutions to the International Declaration of Human Rights in order to enhance female human rights and specifically to battle sexual violence. That's Catherine A. McKinnon, a lawyer and professor of law at the University of Michigan Law as well as Harvard Law, wrote the novel Are Women Human? And she had this to say. International law failed women by not recognizing that sexual and reproductive violence are violations of human rights because they were regarded as either too human to fit the notion of female or too female to fit the notion of human rights. And unfortunately, we're still experiencing a lot of that today.
Alright, so here is an actual list of the Declaration of Human Rights.
Discrimination is interesting. Don't discriminate.
Alright, so now that you've kind of had a chance to read through an actual list of human rights according to the Declaration, do you think that everyone in the U.S. has those?
I don't think so. I don't even think that I knew all of these until looking at. I didn't even know some of these were rights.
Yes, I really do think we have all of these. We have a lot of rights that I feel like aren't even on this. A lot of people seem to have them.
So at this point in the interview, I actually kind of stopped asking them questions and just took time to educate them about the issue at hand in Iraq and what's happening to the Yazidi religious culture. So I want to take this time to basically educate you and let you know what's going on. The Yazidis are a religious culture dating back thousands of years that includes elements of Christianity, Islam, and a few other religions. Although there is much uncertainty, it was believed that the population size of the Yazidis was at roughly 300,000, although so many of them have been scattered across the country, forced to leave, or have been killed, it's hard to know exactly how many are left. It is believed that over 3,100 Yazidis have been killed, and over 6,800 more have been kidnapped. So basically what's been happening is the terrorist group ISIS has basically been kidnapping all of these females of the Yazidi religious group. Now, when ISIS kidnaps them, they basically use them as sexual weapons of war and force them to marry ISIS soldiers. When this happens, the Yazidi women have to give up their religion because they are not allowed to marry outside of the Yazidi religious culture. So now ISIS is basically using these women as objects. They're using them to birth babies to increase their population size of their army. If the women say that they don't want to be married into ISIS or kidnapped, then they're slaughtered right there on the spot. The Iraq government isn't technically saying that this is okay, but they're also not stopping it. As a Muslim government, they're actually kind of happy that ISIS is doing this, because at one time the population of the Yazidis was so large that the Muslims were actually the ones who were kind of basically being chased out of the country. Now that they have control, they're happy to take over and allow ISIS to basically do whatever they want. As we discussed earlier, those 8 resolutions that the United Nations put into effect in the Declaration of Human Rights, those prohibit the states from including sexual violence in amnesty provisions and require them to prosecute those responsible, basically saying that the Iraq government needs to act. They also embody the willingness of the United Nations not only to apply sanctions against parties committing sexual violence in situations of armed conflict, but also to link the prohibition of sexual violence with maintaining international peace and security. Basically what this is saying is that all the countries that are in the United Nations shouldn't just allow another country to commit sexual acts of war because it violates the security and peace of the entire globe when that happens.
So after kind of hearing what's happening in Iraq to the Yazidi people, how do you feel? Do you think that this is a violation of their human rights?
For sure. I think definitely as like a woman, it hits a little bit like harder. Just thinking about like, I'm sure there's definitely a lot of young women that are being persecuted and forced into things that they don't want to do. And
It's absolutely wrong.
I feel their situation is really bad and that they're probably very trapped in where they are, especially because the government is not helping them but actually hurting them.
Alright, so the last thing I actually did with my interviewees was I handed them a copy of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide pamphlet. I had them look over the guidelines that kind of describes a genocide, and then I basically asked them, do you think this situation in Iraq constitutes a genocide?
I think definitely because whether they're killing them or whether they're torturing them while they're married to these ISIS members, they have to live with the decisions made by someone else. So that can cause physical harm or that can cause mental harm, but there's definitely intent to destroy.
I think it absolutely does.
Why do you think that?
Well, partially they're not giving them any choice. They're either saying you become part of who they are, or they won't let you live. The treatment is very inhumane.
I'd say it is a genocide, considering they are not only killing members of the group, but they're deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part, and they are mostly in part because they're only attacking the woman and taking the woman away, and that's really destroying what the culture is.
Well, why should we care? What can we do? Well, for starters, I think if you are a person who believes in human rights and is just an advocate for people having their own choice in life in general, I think you should definitely be a little bit emotional about this and definitely have this stir in you to kind of push for some change and want the United Nations to do something. I think also some of our readings from this year kind of feed into this because Powers talks about how a government that allows tormenting of their own citizens and basically tortures their own citizens will probably allow it to occur to their neighboring countries. So, Arabia is starting to experience some of these issues that is happening in Iraq, and who knows, we could experience this as well, either from the terrorist organizations or economically. I think also going off of Maglio's presentation that she gave in class, these females are being stripped of their right to an education, and that's really hurting the country as a whole. So I think that's another reason to maybe be concerned about this issue is if you're not upset about the genocide or the, basically, these human rights being stripped, you should be upset that these girls aren't being given an education and aren't able to learn and better the world that we live in. And finally, I think we should care just because if you're a human being who cares about other human beings, I think that until we live in a world where everybody has the exact same human rights, we're living in a corrupted world that's not fair, and I think that that's something that needs to be fixed, that's something that needs to be solved, and I don't think anybody should just rest easy or relax or forget about that until it's fixed and solved. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you learned something today, and I hope you feel as passionate about this issue as I certainly have become after learning more and more about it. My sources will be posted on the next page, so if you're looking for more information on any of this issue, please feel free to check those out. Thank you.